Subversive live stream. Wait, sorry, we're a little late. I'm your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and I'm here with Anthony Marquetta. And we'll be doing like a pre hit his Reformation stream. Mostly, we're going to talk about like Joan of Arc, various saints, the religious climate. I know this will
One
sound.
might say it has nothing to do with the Reformation at all, but I don't know about that.
I don't know either. It's more like Anthony and I have stuff we want to talk about in like the
Yeah, pretty much.
1400s pre Luther, like well pre Luther. Actually, what years did the Reformation happen? 16 something, right?
When did the Reformation start? You're a prop. You should know this.
No, I refuse. I'm a fundy. October
1517.
1517. Jinx.
Yep.
So yeah, no, we just want to talk about things for a bit. Um, the biggest thing is that we're discussing Joan of Arc. I'm working on something that uses Joan of Arc as a character who shows up, you know, sort of as a saint that's doing work on this earth, which I don't firmly believe in it, but I think some things are more fantastic than people might accept. It's just that there's no evidence for it. It's like, would I go to the stake to say that, saints and such are still working on this earth for the benefit of heaven? I would absolutely not go to the stake for that. However, in my private thoughts and ideas, I would not die on that hill. I do think that the idea that it's over in death and that we're just in heaven doing heaven things, as glorious as they may be, is not is a small-minded view of it. Does that make sense, Anthony?
Yes.
So it's not so much that literally you might be sitting across the bus from Joan of Arc, that angry French woman who gets mad at you every time you look over at that woman with the low blouse. She is also mad at the woman, but she's more mad at you for looking. Like it's not. I'm not saying like that, but I am saying that during certain events, things may happen, especially in Catholic countries. Uh, Joan of Arc is an interesting character. I've read a little about her, and from Catholic sources, or at least children's book sources. So of course they sanitize some things, but
Hmm.
she's always an interesting read. I guess you'll say. Um, how do the so like you mentioned in an earlier conversation? By the way, guys, we were going to have Adrian Cole to talk about the Dream Lords. However, he is not responding to his email. So maybe we'll try to get him in sometime, or at least I will. Anthony doesn't have to really come onto this.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
we'll say to be fair here, that we already messed up one interview, so it is
yeah,
now equal. Uh,
yeah.
like, don't I don't want to sound too bitter towards Mr. Cole.
No, no,
Like, he's not responding. How dare he?
we forgot the first time, and then we'll see what happens the second time. Not that we'll discuss why. So anyway, she seems like an interesting character, and I think, how do I want to put it? Um, yeah, you said that the Catholic Church reformed her character. Could you talk about that for a minute?
No, not exactly. Actually, I might have gotten lost in translation. I was trying to say the opposite. That there was like, so basically, for those who don't know, I've mentioned this on stream a few times, but even though I am not a diagnosed autistic, Joan of Arc is my autistic special interest. Uh, uh, I have read many, like Ben's like, oh, I've read some children's book on Joan of Arc. I've read like 3, 4 different biographies on Joan, and I've read the primary sources, which are all translated.
Mm.
So, in other words, the trial transcripts, right? By the way, the best book by far is Joan of Arc in the words of her and her contemporaries, which is literally just like a historian, arranged the primary sources in a sort of chronological order of her life so that it reads like a biography, but it's just quoting the primary sources.
That's pretty
Uh,
cool.
yeah, excellent work of scholarship, I think. popular scholarship, really useful. Anyway, so I know a lot about Joan. I've read Hilaire Below, that book, and then there's a book online on the website Made of Heaven and something else, whatever. So, point is, I am very much in favor of like what we have to go on are the primary sources. For us to doubt the primary sources, we would need to have very compelling evidence that they are absolutely wrong, especially because, contrary to popular belief and what you'll sometimes hear people say, Joan of Arc is actually one of the most well-documented historical figures of all time. And the reason for this is very simple. There were 2 ecclesiastical trials associated with Joan of Arc, and we have the records in full of both trials, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, there was actually a third that was like not a trial exactly, but after she met the king, Charles VI, he sent her to be questioned by like a team of theologians at a university. And we unfortunately don't have those records of like what she actually told them and said, but they came back with like basically a bill of sanity that was like, yeah, she's, we can't confirm or deny if she's really seeing what she says she's seeing, but she's not insane, right? Like something like that. And that's when Charles said, okay, then we'll send you in. When I talked about her being reformed, what I meant was something like this. So after the first trial of Joan of Arc, right? Joan is killed. So she's captured by Burgundians who are allied with the British, and she is put on a local show trial. So keep in mind, this is very important. This trial did not go up to the Vatican. And this is notable. Legally, it probably should have, because Joan at one point invokes the Pope. Which once you do that, then like according to the rules of ecclesiastical trials at the time, once you invoke the Pope, then they need to like bring the Pope in to litigate. I think the reason you wouldn't do this, I don't understand this entirely because I'm not like a scholar on this subject, but it would be like a risky decision. You would do this as a last resort.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But
You might
Joan
just be
did do
stuck
it.
in a dungeon forever.
Yeah,
Hello,
which is what
Mr. Cole.
happens. Oh, Adrian. Hello.
Hello.
Sorry, I called you.
Hi. Okay.
Cool. We'll table this discussion. You're more interesting.
It's true. For those who just saw my Twitter post, we're back with Adrian Cole. Yeah. We'll talk about Joan of Arc some other time. She is an interesting character. Do you have any opinions on Joan of Arc, Mr. Cole?
Joan of Arc. Yeah. Well, she was one tough lady. I know that.
That's true.
She put up a hell of a fight, didn't she?
Yep.
Very true.
All right, Mr. Cole, just to introduce you to people for the Whiplash's sake, you are a science fiction and fantasy author. I have heard your name before, though I will admit I'm looking forward to getting the Dream Lords. It never came across my reading preferences when I did see your name when I was a kid, perusing my local library science fiction set. So I am looking forward to it, but I some people, I don't know. It's like one of those things. You've been working since the 70s, haven't you?
Yeah. Yes. This is my 50th year of being a published author.
Amazing.
I'm nearly famous now. Only another 20 odd years to go, and I should be there.
Absolutely. Um, with the way AI is going, can we say your career will ever end?
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's many science fiction short stories and more about that. But let's focus a little bit on your career. Where does the Dream Lords feature in your career, sir?
Well, I started writing it when I was about 19 years old, and at that time, um, I didn't even have a typewriter. It was I had a bundle of exercise books from the school that I went to that were left over. So I kind of mapped it out there, and eventually, over a period of about 4 years or so, it went through a number of rewrites. And I kind of beat it into shape, and it finally got picked up by um, a New York publisher, um, and it went into 3 volumes and did reasonably well. It was billed as being in the tradition of Robert E. Howard. At the time, I hadn't read any Robert E. Howard,
Mm.
the famous writer of Conan stuff. This was Zebra Books, and at the same time they were doing books by David Smith and Richard Tierney and eventually Carl Wagner, and I did get to meet Carl a few times. So that was my first offering,
Hmm.
and where it features now is that because it's excuse me, next year will be its 50th year. The Kursova have brought out this new edition, which is they've done a rather beautiful hardback and also paperback, which is an omnibus edition of the three books that made up the Dream Lords,
I
and there's
did
some
get that hardcover. It looks
yeah, and
amazing.
there's some extra material in there. I also I discovered a few typos from the old early days of printing, I think, and
Hmm.
yeah, there was a little bit of what I would call sort of amateurish, but it was my first effort. So there were things in there which I just tidied up a bit, and I added in some new material.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's gone out on a Kickstarter campaign, which will last until the end of the month and a couple more days, and it's certainly early enough to get it published now. So I'm looking forward to seeing it out there for the second time round. Yeah. So it's yeah, my first effort got me off the ground, and yeah, and since then I've done probably coming up towards about 40 novels now, and some 200 short stories
Wow,
in that yeah in that 50-year period.
that is
Yeah.
pretty amazing. 40 novels. We will hope for, at least certainly for me, and I will probably drag Anthony along to publish so many ourselves. Um, let's see here. So the Dream Lords was your first book. What other books may our readers know you by?
Well, I think that what followed on from that was I did a series of books for um, George Allen and Unwin, who were better known for Lord of the Rings at the time. They had the rights for Lord of the Rings, and they wanted to branch out and do some fantasy. And they did a fantasy quartet of mine called the Omaran Saga, and they were published over here in England, and they were then published in the States as well. David Hartwell picked the first one up for Arbor House, and then the paperbacks went out with the Nova Avon books, and then they did a second quartet of books called the Star Requiem, and they all did reasonably well. And then I've had a series of books about a character called the Voidal, and so on down the line. I've got one or two I can wave at you. The
Uh,
most recent
we're
most
only
recent
recording audio, sir. Just
Oh,
so you
you
know.
are? Okay.
Yeah, sir.
Right, then I'll put those aside. Recently, I've had the first couple of volumes of a more ambitious project, which is War on Rome, and
Ooh.
this is a trilogy of books set in an alternative Romano-Celtic Europe, where certain events in Europe that happened in our time are changed slightly. The main one being that Arminius, who's the principal character in the first volume, in our world, Arminius, who was the guy who some of you will know wiped out 3 Roman legions and significantly embarrassed Augustus Caesar,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and he was starting to band the Germanic tribes together, when Augustus was very worried that they might all descend on Rome. But
Yes.
unfortunately, or fortunately, whoever side you're on, Arminius was actually assassinated by some of his own tribesmen because they felt he was getting a bit too big for his boots. Whereas in my novel, Arminius survives the assassination attempt, and at the same time, Germanicus, who is the adopted son of Tiberius, in our time, he similarly died in mysterious circumstances in Syria. It's often thought that Tiberius, getting a little bit jealous of him because he was beloved of the Roman people, might have had something to do with him being poisoned. However, in my novel, the second novel, Germanicus, he survives his assassination attack, and things culminate in a war, if you like, between Arminius and Germanicus in Britain,
Mm.
where the young Queen Boudica is coming to power. And the third novel in the series is Boudica. And history, let's say, without giving too much away, eventually takes a very different turn to what it does in our world. And it also has a certain number of supernatural elements. I've created one or two very strange societies who are working away in the background, the
Mm-hmm.
Via Tenebrarum, who are trying to manipulate just about everybody and anybody. So it's quite lively, quite lively, and it was quite ambitious, and a lot of research went into it. Great fun to do, and yeah, who knows? I might end up doing even more of them.
Well, it does sound very entertaining. Right now, there is, well, there has been in general, a very big interest in Roman politics. Half of it, of
Yeah,
course, is for the internet fun that
yeah,
that we do tend to get up to, but also a genuine interest in a society that both parallels ours in certain ways, as well
sure.
as has
Yeah,
just an entertaining cast of characters. Germanicus and
sure.
Arminius are certainly two of them.
Mm.
There was I can't remember what show it was where essentially Augustus shouts, Gaius, give me back my legions, and it's
I know exactly what you're referring to. I Claudius, the classic British television
that's it,
series.
that's it.
Derek Jacobi played Claudius, and yes, Augustus, and that 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 quote you've given, "Give me back my legions," they were the three legions that Arminius wiped out, and
Yes,
he was talking to Gaius Quintilius Varus, who was
yes.
the leader, because Arminius was trained as a young man in Rome, and at the time he was serving with Varus in Germania. Uh, Helping him gather taxes and so forth.
Mm,
But he always had it in mind, I think, to use his knowledge of Roman military tactics and everything to turn them around against them. And also in the I Claudius series, the politics and and everything that goes on behind the scenes, as much as in full view, is very interesting, as you rightly said. In when you look at uh, politics and the way the world is today. It's like
mm.
we haven't really learned anything, But that
Oh
was one
no,
of the
never.
yeah, that's one of the things that made writing the book so interesting. Yeah, yeah,
And so we came here to talk about the Dream Lords.
yeah.
What's the name of this book for anyone who might be interested?
The Dream Lords. Well, the current reprint of it, the omnibus, it is given the overall title, The Dream
No,
Lords.
no, no, sir. The apologies. The
The War on
Roman.
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
yes. Well, the War on Rome's the overall title of the series.
War
The
on
first
Rome.
one, yeah, and the first volume is called Arminius, Bane of Eagles, and the
Ooh.
second, yeah, and the second volume is Germanicus, Lord of Eagles, and the third volume, when it comes out, is going to be Boudica, the Savage Queen, and
Very
then
nice.
ultimately, if things work out, I might go on to write Vespasian, followed by Cartimandua, who is another of the British queens. So yeah, yeah.
Mm.
But the first two are available from DMR Books at the moment.
Ooh, very nice. That's a good publisher. Very good. Let's go back to the Dream Lords.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll have you on to discuss the Roman piece in much more detail. But for now, we
Yeah.
must focus. Uh, so the
Okay.
let's talk a bit about the plot of the Dream Lords. What's the overall? Well, not without spoiling anything, but what's the plot and what might we expect?
Yes. Well, it's set in a far distant future when the solar system is being colonized by essentially the humans who go on to become the Dream Lords. And science has taken vast leaps and bounds, and to some extent, there are supernatural elements in it. The Dream Lords have developed this very powerful mental abilities, and basically they control the solar system from their base on Jupiter,
Hmm.
and they're in their past, some 100 years or more in their past, there's been a nuclear war on Earth, which has destroyed it practically, and it's become a prison planet, and the population, mankind that's left there, really are held as prisoners because they're considered to be the source of the evil, which has led to all the corruption and the problems that the solar system has. And the main protagonist is called Galad Sarian, and he is the guy telling the story in the first person. He is the son and heir of one of the Dream Lords, the three main Dream Lords, who are the triumvirate who rule. And he discovers the truth about Earth, um, that it's not, and that the people of Earth are actually the same people as his own people. And
Hmm.
he goes, he is, he starts to rebel against his father, against the Dream Lords, for which uh, he's kind of banished to Mars, where he's sent to a center for teaching and learning. But all that really does is teaches him. He discovers by various methods and through meeting various people the truth of what he learnt about the betrayal of mankind, and so he leads a rebellion against the Dream Lords and is ultimately banished to Earth to imprisonment. And the main gist of the trilogy is about his rebellion and his fight to free the enslaved human race. And once the battle starts and the wars start, it really livens up. I mean, the second volume is almost completely one long sequence of battles, and it goes on from there. So that's the kind of underlying plot, if you like.
I get you.
Uh, yeah, and there are references to kind of biblical prophecies, and um, he meets the warlords of the barbarian hordes on the earth who exist outside the imprisoned ones, and they join up. But there are internal struggles there as well. So the politics comes into it. I think, on reflection, when I was revising or going through the books to prepare them for the new edition, it did strike me that here was some of the groundwork for books like War on Rome, which came later. The
Hmm.
themes of power and the use of power and the abuse of power are something which I've always built into my works. So, although they're very different books, time wise and people wise, there are lots of
Right.
parallels. Yeah.
Well, it's
So maybe,
it's. Sorry, go for it.
yeah, I think without knowing it at the time, I was probably paving the way with the Dream Lords for writing future books like War on Rome.
An author's work is often parallel to itself. It doesn't surprise me in the least.
Mm.
Uh, it's people who sometimes like some authors will how do I want to put this? It's like apropos of nothing, or it's just a fancy that they did. when it's like, no, 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 this fancy or something, is certainly like this other fancy that you wrote earlier, like a fingerprint. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
it goes throughout people's work.
yeah, yeah. And yes, I think I think that that will continue because um, while I'm writing, well, I've been writing War on Rome and revising Dream Lords.
Mm,
In between times, I've also been writing new short stories, and I've been commissioned to do some sword and sorcery stories. And I'm very anybody that reads my stuff will recognise my interest in all things Celtic.
mm,
That's probably because I've got an element of that in my own bloodlines. I've got Irish connections with on my grandmother's side, um, the Devon side of the Celts
mm,
in my dad's side, and although I mean as I say in my books, the Celts, there's kind of a convenient name that was never used at the time. They never called themselves Celts, but the tribes, the peoples of the European tribes of the time. And
mm,
I come back to their mythologies, their gods, whether I'm writing about them specifically or I've created my own fantasy worlds, as in Omara, for example, certainly in the Dream Lords, where you can actually see that there is a strong Celtic influence in there. And with the short stories that I've written recently, I've written about a new character called Ulthar, Ulthar and his I won't say sidekick, but she's a Valkyrie, and those stories are and very much using Celtic and Hibernian Celtic and
mm,
Gaelic influences, and they will undoubtedly resonate in a similar way to a lot of the material in the Dream Lords. It's that same kind of attitude towards life, if you like, and this attitude of defiance. Um, Recently had a story published in a great sword and sorcery anthology called Neither Beg Nor Yield, they,
ooh, what
edited
a
by
name.
yeah, and he's taken that from Macbeth, the quote, and he said that he wanted to do a collection of short stories which encapsulated the essence of what he saw as sword and sorcery, the warrior against all odds, the never say die attitude, the determination and that. And so the writers that got into the book kind of worked on that, and that kind of ferocious, if you like, battling attitude is there in the Dream Lords. I mean, I that's the sort of thing a lot of my fiction has been about since day one when I first started writing it. Um,
Mm.
so yes, you can clearly see that. Yeah, I imagine so. Yeah,
No, I dig it. It is of interest to me to sort of like know writers' fingerprints, partially because it's shall we say, like, you can always say, well, this person read from this person, but they read from this person, but how did they communicate to each other? Like, what are you saying that somebody will pick up inside the book? And it's clear, political intrigue with a side of sword and sorcery, which quite frankly has not really been done as people might think. Like the first Conan book is famously after all his adventures, while he is king dealing with some rebellious
yeah,
subjects.
yeah. That's
Uh,
quite right.
but Solomon Kane never really deals with politics. He's just interested in stabbing the murderer or the evildoer, and his walk before God while stabbing the murderer or evildoer. Um, s-
Right.
Same with just other heroes, even things like Fritz Leiber's, Fafford and the Grey Mouser. They
Yeah.
might have politics within the Thieves Guild, but really, I could not say that they're, I wouldn't say if you came for it, you'd come away anemic, if you get me.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think that the great heroes of sword and sorcery, if you take uh, Elric of
Mm.
Mike Moorcock's Elric, you know, and as you've quite rightly mentioned, and Fritz Leiber, also Jack Vance's Kujul the Clever, um, all the very best sorcery characters have got that independence and that um, um, sod the system. You know,
Mm.
they'll fight for their. They're on the. They're all kind of got a good moral side to them. They're 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 basically good guys, but they're not. It's not black and white. You know, they're a very definite.
They're
There's
not
a
soft.
there's a spectrum, isn't there, to their characters? You know,
Mm.
there's a dark side to them as well, and there's a dark side to Conan. There's a dark side to Elric, obviously Elric, and I think that, but that independence and that determination, um, they respect authority up to a point, but they're their own men and they or women because you have characters like Girl, Henry Cutler, C.L. Moore's wonderful female warrior, and others like that. You know, they have that independence in common, which is quite interesting, really. Yeah, and that's a feature I think of my character. Certainly, Galad, who tells the story of the Dream Lords, is he's not perfect by any means. He's got right on his side when you see some of the things that he's up against, but he is. There are times when you wonder whether it's all turning him a bit mad. You know,
Mm.
this is and this danger of tipping over too much into the dark side is also a feature, I think, of the best sword and sorcery, because all those outstanding characters down the years from the days of Conan right up through to modern writers, they've got that they've got that
Mm-hmm.
kind of that element about them, which probably is, for me anyway, in makes it as interesting as it is, and as interesting to try and write. It's not just about a big beefy barbarian beating the crap out of everybody and everything that moves. The best of it's done with an understanding of the dichotomy. You know. And I saw an interview recently, or sorry, heard an interview recently with a writer called Jim Zub, and Jim is currently writing the new Conan comic for Titan Books, and he gave a very detailed breakdown of how he approaches these characters, and Conan in particular, who he's obviously writing about. And he made the point. He made this very point, you know, and I think that's something which writers who are not familiar with sword and sorcery, who might think, oh no, that's kid stuff. It's just basically big guys, you know, as I said before, beating the hell out of everybody, chucking the wench over his shoulder and riding off into the sunset. But there's a lot more to it. Um,
Mm.
so you know, bring it on.
Oh yeah. Well, don't get me wrong. I'm a little bit partial to such things, but
Yeah,
at the same time, I'm not going to. What's the word I want? You know, like I don't need it. It's just fun when it happens.
yeah,
I think you know, pulp has that interesting distinction of you can, especially sword and sorcery, is that you can distill it to a nice recipe. But
yeah,
in reality, like any say burger or fish and chips, it's the flares that I just came back from England myself, uh,
right.
and I ate fish and chips 4 times. It was
Oh, well,
delicious.
very good.
Um, but you know, it's that flair, that flavor that comes out that makes a chippy worth going to or not, or a burger
Sure.
joint or a barbecue. You know,
Yeah,
it's you know, like people revere Conan because he was the best, and then the rest of them you sort of see and they're brought up because they have an interesting flavor to them. Um, hmm. Yes.
yeah. So I think that, from my point of view, um, the I don't like to get too prescriptive about sword and sorcery. If you said to me,
Hmm.
"Is Dream Lords?" If you had to categorize it, I suppose you'd call it Sword and Planet.
Yes.
Um, because it was very much influenced by John Carter of Mars, who I was a big fan of Burroughs stuff when I was when I from about 14 onwards. I still enjoy the Burroughs books very much, Tarzan and all those, and you
Mm-hmm.
can clearly, if you read the Dream Lords, you'll clearly see the influence of John Carter in terms of the action and the sword fighting and the battles and the setup. I
Mm-hmm.
also one of the books that it's one of the reasons actually started writing it, my own book, was I read June by Frank Herbert, which is one of my favourite books of all, and not long after that I read Lord of the Rings, and between those books they all gave me the springboard to think, well, rather than sit down and think maybe I'll write a novel sometime in my life, probably in my later years, I thought, well, why am I going to wait? Let's do it now. Let's get on with it.
Mm.
And you'll see the influence of. I'm not saying for 1 minute that the Dream Lords is anything like as good as June. June's a masterpiece,
Of
but
course.
the influences are there, very strongly, and um, I dare say there are probably a few Lord of the Rings influences. They're less obvious, at least I would think so, in the Dream Lords. But yeah, so you're starting to. I started to cross over genres a bit. The other main influence for the Dream Lords was Dennis Wheatley, the British thriller writer who wrote a series of black magic novels, things like The Devil Rides Out and to the Devil a Daughter, which I think many of your listeners will be aware of if they haven't read them. And so in the Dream Lords books, which is, you could say, well, it's kind of science fiction. As I say, it's Sword and Planet, but you've got quite strong supernatural elements because the villain of the piece, Daras Vorta, is also he worships a god called Shaitan, which is a kind of
Mm-hmm.
almost like an Islamic Satan,
Yes.
and so you've already in my work you're starting to get this crossover, this admixture, which the purists aren't always very keen on. But I just thought it made for a really interesting concoction, and that kind of approach is there in an ongoing way in my work, and has been since,
Mm.
and will continue to do, I think. And I think that's where when your genre starts to blur a bit, it's not pure one thing or another. It's not pure sword and sorcery. It's not pure horror, whatever.
Mm.
I think if it's if you get it right, it can add an extra dimension and make it very interesting, and it can make it innovative because I think that the best of, if you want to call it sword and sorcery, is where somebody's really stretched it, pushed, gotten. One of my colleagues, Daryl Schweitzer, once talked about leaping off into the left field, and I think if you do that and keep hold of things, you've got a rich vein of material that you can work
Right.
with.
It's true. Uh, it's like, well, it goes back from the beginning to sort of like Pulp's roots with Gothic novels. Gothic novels came from romances and chivalrous novels. Uh,
Yeah,
Castle of Otranto is a chivalrous novel, a King Arthur kind of style novel, as much as it is, a gothic horror novel set in all of the trappings that one would recognize from Edgar Allan Poe. Same with
yeah,
Vathek, which
yeah,
instead
yes,
takes the Arabian Nights.
that's right. Yes, yes, yes. I'm familiar with those. Yes, certainly. And I think that um, I can't speak for other writers, but I know those that I know. It's true to some extent. Um, we are very much. Well, I'm very much influenced by just such writers as you named and others. You don't want to do it in a way which is obvious. You don't want to pinch their ideas, but
No.
there are times when you write a passage or a chapter in a book or something, and you reflect on it. You think, well, I kind of think. I didn't realize it at the time, but I can see where that came from, you know. And if I can recognize it, then I can make sure that I steer away from cribbing anything, you know. But I think, you know, as somebody once said, we are what we eat. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, it can, I don't think it's something that a writer should shy away from. I think it might trigger a cascade of interesting ideas that lead to something very different from the original. Um, But yeah, I think, and I think in the Dream Lords, uh, there's a very much a distillation of lots of different sources, and I'd like to think that perhaps it's given the trilogy its own flavour, you know, so that you can say, well, yeah, this is a Sword and Planet, but then you might think, yeah, but actually, is it, you know? And I
Mm.
don't mind that it's not. I don't try to pigeonhole myself or push myself into a specific genre. I don't mind bursting out a bit, um, because I like to be unpredictable. I don't like people necessarily to know what's going to happen, um, but at the same time, you want to remain reasonably sensible. You don't want to be going too far over, so that you've lost your audience altogether.
Oh yeah.
I think it you know, it's just an opportunity to come up with something unexpected, which is always a good thing. I think. I
Right.
think if there's a I think there's a common criticism about the sort of basic sword and sorcery is that it all becomes the same thing repeated over and over. There are lots of Conan clones. Uh, Back in the 70s, we had any number of barbarian warriors in series,
Mm.
most of whose names all began with K or something something exotic. And basically, they were going through the motions of doing the same thing, the same thing, the same thing, without really stepping out of that and bringing in something original.
Right.
Uh, and it was maligned because of Sword and Sorcery was maligned because of that largely, quite rightly.
Mm.
But if you discovered people like Moorcock and Leiber and Vance and Clark Ashton Smith, you suddenly realise there's a whole new universe out there, and that became and has remained the really interesting thing about the genre, which I think still has a huge amount to offer, as there are writers around today who are, you know, exploring it.
Absolutely. I do view sword and sorcery of brothers with things like, things that you would call them pulpy, but really they're their own genre, like detective noir and stuff like that. You just
Yeah,
exchange the barbarian for a battered iron detective.
yeah,
Having, instead of sorcerers and nobles, you have Hollywood directors and, politicians. Their magic, political and of a certain different kind than a sorcerer of Set or some high priestess.
yeah,
And that's what, like the ability, like comedy dell'arte, to recognize the characters but also be surprised with something new is where the genre truly shines.
yeah.
Uh,
And
yes.
I've tried to do something with that. Another one of my characters is called Nick Nightmare, and he's a psychic detective, um, private eye who is kind of in the Mike Hammer mold. You know, Mickey Spillane, who's
Mm.
another author whose work I enjoy very much. I know it's politically totally incorrect these days, but I love the sheer storytelling and the power of his stories. And Nick Nightmare, I was given the opportunity to write one of these kind of stories, and he just came into it, and I got the opportunity to write a number of them. So, Nick Nightmare Investigates is an anthology of is a sorry collection of Nick's stories, and he's he's not unique in that he deals with various supernatural forces like Lovecraft's mythos gods, Cthulhu, and the like, and gradually through the stories, I wanted to introduce as many elements as I could. I've got superheroes in there. I've got a kind of similar character to Sherlock Holmes and Watson, and there's a character called the Maya Beast who's very much like the Man Thing and Swamp Thing from the Marvel comic things, and all those kind of universes all cross over. And he spends most of his time in a world called the Pulp World, where all the comic book characters and all these fantasy characters from our world are actually real. And in the Pulp World, they read they read comics and magazines about people like Nick Nightmare. And when he goes into their world, you kind of get this kind of clash. And he meets one of his heroes is a character who is a bit of a he's very much like Mike Hammer, and he's much more hard boiled than Nick. Nick's got a slightly more gentle side to him, and he goes into Portwood and actually meets this Killigan. He's called Ned Killigan, and he actually meets his comic book. He reads these pulp paperback, trashy paperbacks about this thick ear private eye, and he meets him in reality in this other world, and they have a couple of adventures together, and that's been great fun to do because it's again pushed all those boundaries right out, and anything goes, and that's been a lot of fun to do. Yeah.
And that's the important thing, having fun. Um, it's if the reader's not having if you're not having fun writing it, the reader's not going to have fun reading it.
That's
Um,
it.
yes. You said that, let's take a look at that Kickstarter or
Oh, yeah,
Indiegogo.
yeah,
Yes, Kickstarter. You said that there were some extra things added to the omnibus. What have you got for
yeah,
us?
yeah. Well, there is a there are various editions of the book. As you know, with the Kickstarter, you set various targets, and if you hit certain targets, you get so much for it. And if you go higher and higher, there are the targets as you go up the scale. And I think there's a obviously there'll be a digital version of it available. There
Mm-hmm.
is a nice paperback edition of it with a nice wraparound cover, and then you've got the hardback and the sort of deluxe hardback edition of it. And I think there's also if it hit its if it broke the big target, it was going. There's a, a unique trading card which is taken from the cover of the book of Galad Sarian,
Mm.
the Pale Horseman.
So it is over $5,000. So we should be getting
Well,
that
it
trading
is. I
card.
mean, the initial target. I'm delighted to say it hit its initial target on the first day. It went out on the 1st of October, and by the end of the day, it had hit its first target. So that meant that it was going to be published, and it was away, and it's been creeping up ever since. So
Mm.
if we want to get a final rush now, that would be great. But it's passed through the $5,000 mark, which will mean it will that trading card and any other goodies that are there will be available to the backers, which is good. And I ought
Yeah.
to say, since we are doing my best to promote the book, that Cursova, the publishers, over the past few years, um, when um, Alex, the publisher, first got in touch with me, basically what happened was he emailed me and said that he was writing an article about the Dream Lords books,
Mm.
and he had some questions for me because he wanted to know a little bit about how certain things had happened and how they come about. And I wrote back in my usual fulsome style. I gave him a detailed response, and he said, "Well, rather than me try to translate this, can I just quote you in my?" Um, and I said, "Yeah, fine," And over correspondence continued, and he said that would I be interested in doing some fiction for his magazine, the Curse Over magazine, which he's doing periodically. It was fairly new at the time, and of course I said, "Yeah, sure."
Of
I said,
course.
"Well, look, I'll tell you what. Why don't I write a brand new Dreamlord story, which is set 100 years after the Dreamlord trilogy? Because the world would be quite interesting then. How things are panning out after the revolution. And so, to cut a long story short, that was a yes. That got published, and I started writing more of the new Dreamlord stories. And I've now reached a point where I've got enough to put them together with a couple of brand new novellas for a brand new Dreamlord novel called
Ooh.
Dreamlord Legacy. And dependent on the success of this reprint omnibus edition, that one could well see the light of day next year. That could be a Kickstarter for next year. So I think readers who have enjoyed the Dreamlords in the past and new readers, I think they would probably be very interested in this new one. It's all right. It's good. It's worked out quite well. It doesn't. It's not. It doesn't go over the same ground. It's not. You know, a kind of anemic version of it. I think it's quite lively and got some nice new twists to it. Hopefully, certainly the publishers enjoyed it. So that's that's one to watch out for next time.
I mean, I love hearing that sort of thing. I'm never, shall we say, a big fan of things just sort of disappearing once it's done. Like many, I'm a very big critic of shall we say people churning out entire 20 book series of 100 pages each that they then turn into an omnibus for more sales. Not any how do I want to say it? Not any regard for the work itself, but just kind of like, oh, this is the most profitable thing to do, don't you know?
Yeah,
So I'm
sure.
always happy to um, promote this kind of stuff instead for the joy of it and for the joy of how do I want to put it? The quality and excellence of the story, uh, which as yourself being a producer of a great deal of art, you can certainly be trusted on to deliver.
Yeah, the I don't think I would want to have pursued this sequel volume if
Hmm.
I had found it interesting to explore that world and that time myself. And the idea it almost wrote itself. Lots of the ideas came to me, and because I was asking myself, what would happen next? All these various different characters, these nations, and that, um, and there's so much out in the world which needs to be because the Earth having been destroyed in the nuclear war in the really distant past in the Dream Lords. Um, what would it be like? What sort of places would they come to? And you push your imagination to the limit. So you're not
Hmm.
settling for some simple diluted version, as you say, just to grab in a few more bucks. You're genuinely trying to write an interesting, exciting story, and the groundwork's already done. And of course, it's as I say, it's set 100 years later, so we're not regurgitating all the same characters. One or two surprise characters turn up, but I
Oh
hope
yeah.
I justified that. And yeah, yeah. Uh, I'm quietly confident, as they say, that it will be okay, be good. Yeah, be a good read.
Very good. And cheesecake is not something people really complain about as often as people might want to say. Um, you can definitely put in stuff like that, and people do appreciate it. Hmm. Let's see. Uh, and we'll certainly find out when I get this in my hands. The nice
Oh,
hardback. Mm.
and going back to the Kickstarter, it does finish on I think it's
October
midnight.
31st.
Yeah, the midnight, which is like where are we now? What are we Tuesday, aren't we? So
Yes.
we got about 48 hours to go, haven't we? So um, a final flurry, a final boost, and then
Mm.
it'll go onto Amazon, it'll go onto Barnes and what they called the other one.
Barnes and
Um,
Noble.
that's it, Barnes and Noble. Yeah, God bless them. And a million seller will be born. We hope,
Absolutely. And I know I saw a bookstore in every train station, give or take. When I was in England, certainly in Waterloo, we should try and get that in there too. But we'll
All
see.
right.
We'll see.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, it'd be nice. Yeah. So yeah, we'll. I'll be very interested to see how it does. I mean, it's. I was really. I've been delighted with the way that the Kickstarter's gone because it's nice to think that there is an interest there. And it's very encouraging because it can only make you want to keep going. I mean, I had my 75th birthday this year, and I've no intention of slowing down or stopping or retiring. One or two people have asked me that, but no, I think I'm probably as active now as I've always been, and long may it continue until somebody says you really need to stop. That
Right,
last
right.
one, that last one was really, no. Time to call it a day, mate.
That,
But
that,
not yet, not yet.
well, that person is a true friend.
That's it. Yeah.
Is that's fantastic. I love hearing that sort of thing. Um, let's see. You have published works within Cursova, right?
Sorry, with who?
Cursova.
Oh yes. That's the publisher of the Dream Lords, and as I say, I've had a number of short stories in their magazine, which is excellent magazine with some very good,
Yes.
very good, and also magazines like Tales from the Magician's Skull, which has been a very good one, and Weird Book, which the Weird Book magazine, originally going back in the 70s. Paul Ganley was the editor at the time, and I wrote stories for him about a character called the Voidal, who is another one of these very strange dark fantasy characters. And then in recent years, editor called Doug Dre, American based in Germany, Doug took up the editorship of the new version of Weird Book, published by Wildside Press, John
Hmm.
Betancourt, and I've written stories regularly for Weird Book. And the latest edition, which is number 48, just happens to be number 48, but it's a special edition which is entirely devoted to my humble efforts. It's a kind of pulp fest, if you like. There are 9 stories, 8 of which are brand new, one of which is the new Elac of Atlantis story, which is included in one of the Elac books. And yeah, I'm delighted to say that it's it's got an interview with me by Daryl Schweitzer. I mean, I've known Daryl as an electronic friend, if you like, for years, and he's published lots of stories of mine. And I've put a complete bibliography of all my books and short stories in there as well. So you can put my boast to the test that I've done all those things because they are there black and white for you. But
Hmm.
it's I think it's that's collection of pulp novellas. There's Nick Nightmare, there's Elac of Atlantis, there's mythos stories, um, and horror stories, and right on down the line. So I think it's a nice eclectic mix for people who it's fun. We talked about fun. They're all fun stories. No messages really, just plenty of action and enough to keep you reading. I hope.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I go back talking about collect magazines and that. I going back to the 70s. I mean, I was writing for people like Richard Davis and Mary Danby and various editors at the time. Stephen Jones, a well-known editor who's still editing now. I've done a lot of work for Steve over the years. Um, yeah, I've been in some splendid company, and again, I say long may it continue. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Um, hmm. We talked about the publisher. We've talked about your work outside of the Dream Lords. We've talked about the Dream Lords. Um, we it's hmm. It's interesting to have you on because you've been around for a great deal of the changes that have gone through science fiction and fantasy over the years.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yet, still the same sort of things tend to get sold in the magazines where the real work is being done. Um, this may shock people to hear, but those big central magazines are probably not publishing the really important work, um, especially when they promote things that are, shall we say, less than good, um, but very
yeah,
politically expedient.
yeah. I think that for me, one of the real uh, tragedy, if you like, or something that's rather sad about publishing,
Mm-hmm.
is that back in the 70s, I mean, I don't want to whinge on about the good old days because, times change, things move on, and,
Right.
there's good stuff through all periods. But back in the 70s, there were a lot of publishers about, both in Britain and in America, for example, and they didn't expect every book that they published to be a multi-million bestseller. It
Mm.
would be. I mean, they had their big names and they had their big sellers, but they had the opportunity for writers and newer writers as well. There were lots of opportunities, and it may be that the books which were sold far less copies were to some extent subsidized by the more successful ones. But I think somewhere
Right.
along the line, a change happened, and a lot of the bigger publishers gobbled up the smaller ones. And the old names, if you remember people like Lancer Books and
Mm.
Tower and Belmont and, I don't know, Pinnacle. There were lots of Pyramid. There were lots of books. They all got gobbled up by the big publishers, and it seems that we've reached a point where, if you don't write a big blockbuster fantasy novel, there's no room for those smaller ones now, which is why the small presses have proliferated. There are more and more smaller presses, but of course they don't have the clout to promote and publicize things. So most small presses exist on a shoestring, and they don't give you an opportunity to get published, but they don't. You're not going to get the sort of sales that used to be generated. And I think that that's one side of the publishing which is has slipped away.
Mm.
And I I've I don't read very much fantasy these days, or the big novels. Um, I've tried one or two of them, but I've kind of lost interest in that. I tend to read more. Combination. I'll read. Uh, I might read historical novels more. Certainly read quite a bit when I'm researching for example, War on Rome. But I also like going back and reading some of the classic stuff, if you like. I mean, last night I finished reading a book called Failsafe, famous science fiction novel by Eugene Lederer and Burdick and Lederer, and I've gone back to read some of my favourite old spy novels and espionage novels from the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and still enjoy them. But I think that um, to have the range of science fiction, fantasy, sword and sorcery, and all the splinter subgenres of it that we used to have, we don't have that now, and I think that's a shame.
Mm.
It's partly being driven by a swing over to the electronic age. That obviously young people are used to doing more and more online now. They're used to not necessarily electronic books, but games have become a massive industry now, haven't we? We didn't have the computer gaming uh, when I was a young guy. No, we never had computers. Never mind. Never. I just about managed to get a type. I had an old portable typewriter. When I first wrote the Dream Laws, I did it on a manual typewriter. It wasn't electronic or anything. Carbon paper and all this sort of thing. So technology's moved on, and it's taken I think it's I'd say divided the audience, but the perhaps the demand for books isn't what it was, and I think the other thing, of course, is the cost of it all. I mean, books these days are expensive, aren't they? I mean,
Yes.
gone are the days when you could go to a convention. When I was a young lad in short trousers, I could go to a convention and come away with 20, 25 books because it hadn't cost me an arm and a leg. Now I go to a convention, I might buy two or three, and that's it.
Mm,
Books are, yeah.
I
But there's
agree.
still, yeah, there's still enough of really good stuff about. But I think it must be very difficult for anybody starting up now to break into uh, professional publishing. Certainly, you can get published with the smaller presses, but um, if you can use that as a stepping stone, it's great. But it's very hard. That the leap from that to the bigger publishers is, whereas once it was quite a big step to do it, no doubt about it, but it's now become almost like a chasm. It's really hard, really hard.
Oh, yes. I mean, while I do these streams, I often play a video game, whether some, card game or like the one I'm playing right now, which is a first what's called a first person shooter, where a woman is in a space station that is being attacked by special forces, and she has to escape fighting her way through. Very exciting. I'm currently trying to figure out some secrets that has some goodies and whatnot, and it's very entertaining. I can't exactly read while I do these things, and it provides some visual interest. But quite frankly, a lot of these games don't hire writers either, and it shows. Like
Yeah,
the shooters don't need much writing. Hey, here's the bad guy. You
yeah,
don't like him because he kicked your dog. You don't
yeah.
need much. But like some of the more like you may have heard of like the God of War series.
Oh
The
yeah, yeah, I've heard of it.
Yes. The most recent ones, have very much, needed an editor, and they needed somebody to rein in the story a bit.
Mm.
There were some excellent points, where you have two fathers like Thor and Kratos duking it out over their children, with very exciting set pieces and fights and whatnot. But quite frankly, it took, 50 hours to get there. Um, there was some moralizing that needed to be taken out, and a whole lot of other problems besides. And that's just for a game that's worth remembering. Heaven forbid I tell you all the ones that are certainly not worth remembering. It would shorten your life for the toxins.
Well, I've never got into gaming at all. Um, my grandson is he's very keen on. He's only 7, but he's uh,
Mm,
very agile with the computer keyboard, and he copes with stuff that leaves me a long way behind.
mm,
But I get the impression from what I've seen of things that um, every action is everything. It's
yes.
effect and action, which is okay. I mean, I like special effects. I like special effects movies. I love it, and I'm very fond of comics. But I do like to have the characters, the dialogue, the story, all the ingredients that you get in a good novel or story. I mean, I still treasure those, and too much too much of one thing for me dilutes it. But I think that does seem to be a trend today.
Mm,
I can't speak from knowledge of the system, of the games and the systems, because I'm not that familiar with them. But I've certainly seen what the basics. That does seem to be um, the way in which the gaming world differs a lot from novels and even graphic novels.
mm.
But obviously, they're all there to make money, and that's what they're going to do. They're going to promote that.
It's true. And for video games, especially with its being such a hands-on activity, having action is certainly will benefit more than anything else. I'm playing a game to shoot evil purple bleeding cyborgs. I expect there to be plenty of purple evil bleeding cyborgs. But there are some other games, puzzle games, Even some games what's derisively called a walking simulator, where you
Mm.
walk around and experience bespoke interactions, which I don't care for because it doesn't have a lot of action. Uh,
Mm.
Fortunately for writers, it's not necessarily the action that draws people as much as it is, the character and the settings and the whole package and even the tactile experience of owning a book.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Well, I shall still be buying books. However long I carry on for. And I was joking with one of my friends the other day and saying that uh, on my last day, whenever that is, hopefully somewhere in the future, I'm sure that on that day the postman will arrive with a parcel of books for me. That have been ordered, and there'll still be stuff in the pipeline because I don't envisage ever actually saying that's it. I've bought everything I want now. Finish. Um,
Yes.
so yeah,
They'll find you collapsed at your door, covered in your books, as
yeah, well,
the guy shoves them through the mailbox.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. My to be read pile will be taller than the house, I expect.
Yes.
I'm sure I've got them, and I've got a huge collection of stuff, and I'm sure there are more than a few books, comics, and magazines up there which, to be honest, I'll never actually read, um,
Hmm.
which is an awful thing to say, but at least that I've got the choice of which ones I read next. It could be any of them, whatever's up there. I might go and pick it up tomorrow. It could be something I mean, it's like I said, it's fail safe. I know the story of fail safe. It's the threat of the nuclear idea. Um, and it came out in 1964, I think it was. And the paperback I've got is pretty much that time. So I must have had it sitting on my shelf since then. But I finally got to read it this week. So
Yes.
whatever's up there could be a target. I might be looking at that next. It's nice to know you can pull it out and read it when you want it.
Oh yeah. I have some fun things which I'm well not exactly saving for a rainy day, but saving for if I happen to change my taste of a sudden. Hmm.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yes. Well, we've been going for about an hour. Uh,
Oh, right, really? Oh. It's time I was in bed. It's
yes.
'cause we're a long way behind you over here. It's I don't know what time do you have now?
It's 5:30 p.m. for me Central Time.
All
My
right.
mother's English, so I actually do keep a running tab
All right. Right.
for what time it is, which is why I'm not pushing you too hard. We need more books from men like you, sir. Um,
I'm doing my best.
yes, yes. Very good. Do you have any final words for us?
Well, thank you very much for having me on and talking to me and hopefully promoting Dream Lords. And here's to the next edition and editions. And yeah, all stay well. And I hope you have a good week. It's a pretty important week for you all over there this week, isn't it? So whatever
Practically
you
the
want,
fate of the world.
I hope you get what you want.
Thank you, sir. That's well said. Well said indeed. But we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
There is 54 hours to go on the Dream Lords by Adrian Cole. It
Yep.
has reached that pledge of $5,000,
Yep.
5,633. So we will be getting a Galad Sarian trading card. That's the main character, right?
Yep.
Uh,
That's
cer-
right.
Certainly the character on the cover. Uh, Hopefully we get another 3,000 in, but that in 54 hours that might be a little much, but we'll see.
Well,
Um,
we can live in hopes. Yeah.
yep, yep.
Yeah.
And congratulations on a successful project already, and I hope to see you again to promote the next one.
Okay. All the very best. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Have a good night.